Sports Interaction is your home for NHL playoff betting. Before the game starts, live in play, or how your favorite player will perform. Canada plays at SIA. Doing it right since 1997. With the most competitive odds, Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Steve Dryden has an article, McDavid undoubtedly the best player ever. I'm just going to read the lead real quick here. Connor McDavid may or may not end up being the greatest player ever, but it's time to recognize this. He is undoubtedly the best player ever. Is this a controversial statement?
I'm sure it's controversial, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. And I like the distinction that he draws. And I'm not saying this just because Steve is my boss. I actually think he did a nice job with the story. I mean, you should know about Steve. He's a hockey historian. He's been around a long time. He literally writes down the goal scorers from every single game in a book every day. He's been doing this for like 30 years. Like he wakes up and sort of writes out his own box score. So he's keeping track of which players are doing what. Like he's as diligent as they come. And so this isn't like someone coming out of nowhere with a hot take at you. And what he's doing is drawing the distinction between greatest and best, right? I think greatest we could accept as over a longer period of time. You know, you might look at Wayne Gretzky's records. You might look at Mario Lemieux's top seasons and say the points per game he put up and make an argument for him as the greatest, or perhaps you want to go down another route. But best is the top in any given moment. And it's hard to argue that, first of all, we were talking earlier in the show about some of these insane individual performances, goals. I mean, I think it's not a stretch to say this is the best quality of offensive play we've seen in the NHL ever. You know, part of that is human evolution. Part of that is the evolution of equipment and things that are able to go on. It's almost just like stretching your mind. Like no one ever tried to put the lacrosse goal in, until 20 years ago. And now you see kids doing it, in practice. And like I think so, you start framing it that way, this generation is better than the last one just as a whole. Connor McDavid is without question the most skilled player in this generation, the best at doing things at a speed that we've never seen before. And so I think that there is an argument there. And I like the way Steve put it. I think that it's a worthy conversation. And he's also at his best, arguably right now in this point in time that he's ever been. And obviously he's established an insanely high bar. He had over 100 points in a 56-game season last year. I mean, this guy's doing things that we haven't seen since the 80s, and we're not, having goal scoring quite being at the 80s league wide. And so, I think it's a fair point and a great debate. And I get that some might not buy it, but who has ever been individually better than Connor McDavid is right now? I don't think you can really make a case for anybody.
I think this is an easier question to answer if you're of a certain age where maybe the best players you've seen are like just seen and not having to go through archival footage. Of my era would be Sidney Crosby or Alexander Ovechkin. Because I think just off the highlights, off the goals, off even if he doesn't have the accolades yet, like Connor McDavid for me objectively is the best player I've ever seen. I'm more intrigued whenever I hear older people who have seen Wayne Gretzky, who have seen Mario Lemieux up close, or some of the other legends from previous eras and how they might react. But you're right. Like McDavid is doing things that those guys in those eras could not do.
Well, I'm not going to dox Steve Dryden here and reveal his age, but I can say confidently that he watched Gretzky and Lemieux play he would have been an adult at that time. And, he worked at the Hockey News before his long run at TSN. And so he's been in the industry for a long, long time. And so again, he's writing that, having seen those guys probably in the early stages of his career, probably remembers some of the stars from before that era, from when he was a kid. And so again, this is a thought out opinion. And it's also someone who's watched even the players closer than I have because he is senior to me. And I remember Gretzky and Lemieux as kids. And then obviously my career is basically covered the same time that the Crosby and Ovechkin have been in the league. Now we're seeing the next generation, the McDavids and McKinnons and Matthews, Marner, Draisaitl, this group. And so, yeah, I like the debate, and it all comes down to best versus greatest. I think we can't get caught up in losing sight of that because, to have the number of records Wayne Gretzky has, the career points and career goals. I mean, that probably establishes him as the greatest, because to do it over that period of time matters too. But based on what we've seen, I mean, if Connor McDavid has a healthy career and plays into his mid to late 30s, I mean, he's gonna put up some pretty crazy numbers in that time, and he's gonna claim some records of his own.
The one thing I hate about this piece is that some people don't have the nuance to understand best versus greatest, or understand just generally what Steve might be trying to say. And
they got 280 characters on Twitter to get angry. That's about it.
Yeah. They're just going to immediately dismiss this and just say like, well, there's no way Connor McDavid could ever be better than Wayne Gretzky because you didn't win all these awards, you didn't score all these goals. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, fair enough. But, you know, if you read the article, I think that it's pretty well laid out. He makes his case. Doesn't mean you have to believe it, but I think you'll understand if you read the article. It's not, he wasn't just going for a headline. It's something he's thought about. And you know, look, it sparks some debate. I was asked about this on radio this week. Obviously, it's something I've seen discussed elsewhere. I've seen people raging about it on my Twitter feed. So, you know, Steve's doing his job there too by throwing something thoughtful out there and letting the world rip it to shreds. But
also, like, Steve's not the only one who's been bigging up Connor McDavid this week. I know we talked about if this is the best Connor McDavid we've ever seen. I know Dom Luszczyszyn has written about the fact that the run that he's on right now is the most dominant one of the most dominant playoff performances we have ever seen. The fact that we get to see Connor McDavid in this moment in the playoffs, we've been, as hockey fans and hockey people, media, we've been waiting for this from him for so long. Not to say that he couldn't do it. We just wanted to see him in this position.
Yeah. And honestly, we're probably missing what's an equally good storyline in my mind is Leon Draisaitl, who's playing with a sprained ankle and is putting up 3 points per game somehow. Like he clearly is limited in his movement. If you watch his skating, it's not nearly as powerful of a stride as he typically has. And we're talking about a very powerful man. And yet he's willing himself to a different level and coming up with big moments. I mean, it's I guess what all the teams, whether you want to look at the Oilers or the Leafs, like teams that are built on skill, it's kind of the fundamental bet with those teams, because obviously in a cap world, I don't think there's no perfect team. There's no perfect roster. You have to spend $1 million on certain players down the roster, and not everyone's going to like who those players are or what have you. But stars can make a difference in the sport and can pull you through. And that's what we're seeing from McDavid and Draisaitl. I think it's just those guys have found another gear, and LA had them on the ropes, right? They had to go to Game 6 in LA and win the game. In that building to just force a Game 7, and then anything can happen in a Game 7, but they found their way through that, and it's kind of propelled them into a strong start to this Flame series. And you start to dream a little bit. I mean, could Edmonton make the Cup final? I mean, that would be a hell of a story. I didn't see many people projecting that. And look, they've got a long way to go. They're not out of round 2 just yet. But with players this good that are already up in the stars, you can start to imagine that the Oilers being on a rocket ship behind them and in the process of a special spring here.